Hey everybody, welcome to today's Wednesday workshop here live inside of LinkedIn, or if you're catching me on the replay on our YouTube channel, welcome. My name is Heather Dranitsaris-Hilliard. So excited to be joining you here today, where we're going to be talking about the fearful leader. One of my favorite conversations, and it's really interesting to think about how much time we actually spend in organizations talking about fear and the fearful leader, and how fear is that primary driver of human behavior. So it has such a substantial impact in organizations when we are working with fearful leaders. And in particular, what I'm going to be focusing on in the workshop here today is the fear of stepping out of the comfort zone. So when we have a fearful leader, what we're always dealing with is that fear that comes about where they just want to stay within their comfort zone and what it means for them, for the organization. Now, during the normal stages of organizational growth, of course, leaders get moved up. Right? They get moved up into senior leadership roles because of their longevity, because of their functional competence. They've been there a long time. They're likable. And so they get to continue to progress and grow. And so it's a wonderful feeling, of course, being successful, being promoted because you are there and the opportunity is there before you, and really arriving into some place of security because you've been with the organization for a long time. But what ends up happening in these cases, in many of these cases, the comfort zone of getting there and arriving to this place through the stages of growth, that's really supposed to be just a resting place, right? A resting place where we, kind of gather ourselves and we get ready to move into the next phase of growth. When it becomes so comfortable that leaders, they just don't want to move, right? They really get stuck. They really get comfortable in that spot, and they really don't want to take on anything more than what it is that they're doing. And so this is really important because leaders, when they are fearful, they become complacent, right? They want to stick with the status quo. They want to stick very much in that comfort zone. And what ends up happening along the way is they start avoiding facing challenges. They start avoiding taking risks again, and really want to, along with others that are often in the organization with them, they don't want to look at their own lack of ability to lead, right? They don't want to look at what's driving their behavior. And really that forces them into a situation where all they want to do is play it safe and really seek out stability over uncertainty. So you can all probably relate to that, where you've encountered leaders who are fearful, or encountered leaders where they are stuck in that place of status quo because it's comfortable for them, right? They get stuck in their comfort. Now, leaders that get caught up in the security of their comfort zone, when they really should actually be leading the organization out of it, they don't realize it, right? Like they don't see themselves as doing anything wrong. And many of them wouldn't even articulate the fact that it's fear or that they're fearful, and that's what's causing them to be self-protective. And what ends up actually happening is the longer they stay in that comfort zone, instead of leading the organization forward, they actually can start leading the organization in reverse, right? So they like what they've created, they like the point where they've gotten to, they like being at the top, and so they start to hold on to it and wrap themselves up in this security blanket of their hierarchy that they've created. And again, they don't see that how what they built and what they developed was supposed to support growth and support the organization moving forward. And so instead they end up strangling the growth, or really stagnating growth for the organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about why leaders get in the way of growth in the organization, and how does this fearful leader show up, right? What are the different ways? We're going to talk about 3 different ways in which we see it over and over again in the clients that we work with. And one of the things that we often say is a bit of a clue that your leader's fearful is they start looking to external reasons as to the lack of growth or the reason why they can't do something. It's always outside of them, and that place of feeling, talking as though they're powerless to do anything about it. That's always a clue for us that we've got a leader who's fearful and a leader whose behavior and approach is being driven by fear, and that's why they're seeking and holding onto that comfort zone. And we're going to talk about Peter Principle. And so for those of you who are not familiar with that concept, Peter Principle goes hand in hand with fearful leaders, and it applies to, and it is what causes organizational stagnation. Now, Peter Principle, if you're not familiar with it, this is the tendency inside of organizations to promote people up to their level in competency. In essence, employees just keep rising up through the hierarchy and up through the hierarchy until they hit their own level of incompetence. And this includes leaders that have been incredibly successful as the organization has grown, evolved, but they get to this up to this point and they're no longer effective in leading at that next level, or they can't change how they're leading to really give the organization what it needs. So they're now at this next level, but they're still leading as though at the level before that, keeping the organization within their comfort zone. And this part of the challenge here and what sort of drives behind the Peter Principle is that fear gets in the way of the development of the leaders. And so they start to say, well, I don't need to develop. I've been successful without developing. Nobody in my organization needs to develop. So they cultivate a group around them of leaders who are also fearful because they lack the skills to be able to lead effectively, right? And again, without that real development to really help them transition up to the next level, and as they max out to their level of incompetence, they don't know how to seek out help. They don't know how to step out of their comfort zone, and so they aren't able to take the business any further. But they're really determined. The fearful leader is really determined to go with the notion that they know what they're doing and to hold this image of themselves as this great leader, okay? But again, what they do in that process is, we're great, the organization's great, there's nothing wrong with us because I'm a great leader, and all of this is fear-driven, self-protective behavior, but it preserves the status quo and ultimately creates organizational stagnation. And why does it matter? Why do we care about the fact that our leaders are struggling with fear and that they're fearful, and so therefore their behavior that they're showing is, again, keeping them within their comfort zone and keeping them on status quo? We know that to be successful in this marketplace today, as it has been for probably decades now, leaders need to be growth oriented, they need to be skillful as leaders, and they need to be able to respond to the changing environment in order to be able to retain employees. And leaders who get so focused on maintaining that status quo and staying within their comfort zone actually drive employees to leave, and they demotivate others. They devalue the people around them. I was talking to someone today about their organization and the fear at the top, and the leaders up at the top are fearful. And so what they're doing is it blocks them and it stops them from allowing anyone else to be recognized appropriately, to be promoted, to be given any sort of level of status or authority in the organization, because they are so afraid of bringing other people up and being too close to them, or bringing in people that might be more competent or have a different competence than they do, right? And then the resistance, when we're dealing with fearful leaders, we are dealing with incredible amounts of resistance in these individuals, right? Their resistance to change, their resistance to growth, their resistance to resolving issues, even their resistance to acknowledging the fact that there are issues. Because again, in their world of their comfort zone, everything is great, they're great, the world is wonderful. And we have to learn, for those of you that are in leadership roles, for those of you who work in HR, you have to learn to recognize the symptoms of this leadership inertia and really understand the driver behind it, that fear that is so prevalent that causes them to be self-protective and to shut down and move into that place of seeking within their comfort zone. Again, we talk about it in terms of the resistance to growth, but it really is about any leader who's gotten stuck in their comfort zone and really aren't willing to step out of it. And we hear it all kinds of examples, everything from, a senior leader who's clearly been pointed out to them that they are not being effective in their role, that they need to build up their team, they need to change their team, and they keep going and saying, well, I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm great, and I'm doing all of this stuff, and my team's great, and they stick again with their comfort zone, and they won't bring anybody in with a stronger skill set. They keep trying to make do with employees on their team that are a level below where they actually need to be because of how the organization has evolved or how the team might have evolved. So again, everybody gets promoted up to their level of incompetence. So we've got leaders who are fearful, promoted to their level of incompetence, not doing the development, not moving out of their comfort zone. They promote people up underneath them who rise to their level of incompetence. And again, no one's doing their development. So this is the setting, the stagnation that trickles down throughout the organization, and it always starts at the very top of the organization. And it's important to understand why leaders resist growth, why they resist moving out of their comfort zone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we walk through our 3 examples for today. And we're going to talk about self-deception, right? Because when we talk about the fearful leader, self-deception is an important part of it, and how they go about deceiving themselves that allows them to continue to feel safe and okay, and that they don't have to challenge things. But self-deception has a massive, massive impact on effective leadership, because as long as we have our leaders telling themselves stories about how great they are and how effective they are, or how everything's okay, we're always going to get stuck in this place of being in the shadow of the fear of the leader and that desire that they have to stick within their comfort zone. So there's 3 things that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about self-deception, as I just mentioned. We're going to talk about this whole notion of, I think I'm great, therefore I'm great, and we're great the way we are. We don't need to change anything in that story. And then the last one, we're going to talk about the fear of changing our own behavior as leaders, because this is what drives organizational stagnation. It's leadership fear and the inertia that comes along with that fear. And I remember when I first started doing, work, decades ago with clients and trying to figure out why clients would, kind of get what they needed to do, but they still wouldn't do it, right? There would be no change in their behavior. And we started to talk, my business partner, Ann, and I started to talk about this notion of fear and the role that fear has in it. And I was at the time really uncomfortable. It's like, I don't want to talk to my clients about fear. I don't want to ask them what they're afraid of. I mean, that caused me to feel fear, right? It's an uncomfortable conversation. And yet what we know based on, brain science, based on personality, that the biggest driver of behavior in human beings is fear, right? When it comes down to what we want and what we fear is what will always win out. And we get triggered into that self-protective system of our brain. Our survival mechanism kicks in. And again, we shut down into that place of, looking to blame others, not being able to change anything, being resistant to ideas, all of these places that are about our comfort zone, because that's where our brain wants us to be, right? And our brain's mind, to a degree, it wants us to be able to stick within our comfort zone because that ensures our survival. But when we're leading an organization, during times of growth and change, or where growth and change needs to be happening and evolution needs to be happening, that fear really gets in our way of being able to be effective as a leader, and it's really important. So the first one I want to talk about, and I'm going to, again, share with you 3 client stories as we do every week. And if you're interested in checking out some of the other stories that as we've been talking about, autocratic leaders and permissive leaders and narcissistic leaders, hop on over to our YouTube channel, Dranitsaris-Hilliard. And we've got tons and tons of resources, prior workshops, and other content there for you around the same sort of theme that we always like to talk about, is these different dysfunctions around leadership behavior and what it is that we can do about it. So self-deception is an interesting one, and self-deception can be rooted in an individual leader. It can get rooted into the collective, and it just plays a really significant part in why an organization fails to continue to grow or it fails to thrive. And because a leader is practicing self-deception and they're telling themselves these things that make them feel okay, they don't see how that behavior is actually impeding growth. And they'll actually look for external evidence to confirm that this issue really has nothing to do with them. I think one of our strongest examples of self-deception is where a client that has been growing pretty consistently and steadily for the last, I'd say 15, 20 years, they have a new leader that they've promoted up. And his new story is that we don't want to grow his company. That we're perfect as we are. We're in the perfect spot. There's no reason for us to grow. And in fact, if we tried to grow, we just end up having to work with clients we don't want to work with. We'd end up having to take on employees we don't want to take on. Like, we're just in this perfect sweet spot. And that's the story that they're telling themselves. And that's the self-deception. And it's not actually that they don't want to grow. It's that that leader is comfortable with not growing. That is their comfort zone. And they would have to develop. They would have to look at taking on some risks. They would have to look at shifting their behavior if they were going to continue to grow as an organization. So instead, to make it okay that they're not growing and they're staying within the comfort zone, this practice of self-deception begins, right? It's fear-driven. When we are telling ourselves something so to get us out so that we don't have to do things that make us feel uncomfortable, or we don't have to do things that are scaring us so that we can avoid our fear and ignore our fear, we will create a narrative that deceives us into believing that this was actually a conscious, objective choice. Even though it's emotional reasoning that we're using, we'll convince ourselves because it sounds logical, it seems objective. Of course, there aren't enough people and there aren't enough clients and there isn't enough money. And so they'll go into this whole piece of justifying why it is they are not growing and not why they're not changing. So this is one of the key patterns we see with the fearful leader, is they will tell themselves stories. And in that story, they're always, they're either powerless, there's nothing I can do about it, there's no way I can change anything here, or it truly is, well, I didn't really want that to happen anyway. I'm really not interested in, being a leader, growing my business, being the top, whatever it is. It's, again, that story we say to deceive ourselves so we stay within that comfort zone. Really, really powerful stuff when you look at the pattern of behavior that comes with it. The next example that we see around the fearful leader is this: we're great the way we are. And this comes again out of that, they've come off of a really great track record. And that track record could be, have happened 20, 30 years ago, but they're still carrying that forward into the present. And because at one point in time, the organization was great and it was working really, really well, it's sort of this belief that we're still great and we don't have to change anything. We just get to be great the way we are without making any adaptation for employees' needs, customer needs, market trends, any of those things. It's like whatever we believe makes us great, then, or we say we're great, and so therefore we are great, right? That I think, therefore I am. And what we see happening here in organizations that are struggling with leaders, fearful leaders that are, again, saying they're great, and so therefore we don't have to change anything, or, they really don't have an appetite for anybody talking about the fact that anything is going wrong or anything isn't working perfectly within the organization. So it's one of the ways they shut down those dissenting voices that might be saying, hey, wait a minute, we're really not that great anymore. And what we see happening in those organizations is the employees start to leave. You see really significant turnover because the organization is not great, and there's fractures in the organization, and we see silos start to emerge in a lack of innovation that starts to happen. And I'm thinking of one of our clients in particular where, they really struggle with this because they do have a phenomenal track record. They do a ton of stuff really, really, really well. But to say that we're great and we're great at everything and we don't need to learn anything new, we don't have to do anything differently, again, that is stagnating the organization. That is that place of us saying, they're trying to stick within their comfort zone, and to keep the organization within their comfort zone of their leadership capabilities. Again, they have to say no change, no innovation. Everything's got to be the way it's always been. In fact, some of the phrases we'll often hear in these kinds of environments are, well, we didn't have to do it like that all those years ago, and we're great then, we're great now, we've got the best people in the business, but they have no objective criteria that they're using. Again, it's just that internal dialogue that keeps putting that out and believing their own press, as we often like to say, right? The last one I want to talk about is with a fearful leader, is they get into this place of being so afraid of changing their own leadership behavior that they start focusing on what everybody else is doing wrong and blaming them for the reason why the organization can't grow, can't change, nothing can be done differently. It's that conversation of, well, it's not my fault. I hired these senior leaders to help them grow the organization and they didn't do it, right? So again, this is another symptom of the fearful leader. It's looking outside of them as the cause for why this is happening, as opposed to saying, taking the organization to that next level is actually out of my comfort zone. And so what do I need to do? And do I want to develop? Do I need to hire someone in to replace me? This is particularly prevalent in founder-led organizations where, as I said, they get up to a certain level of success, and then what they need to go to that next level just isn't there for them, right? I have a client that we've been working with for many, many years, and what ends up happening in this particular organization is that the leader, the fearful leader, brings in these senior leaders, and ultimately, of course, they don't work out because he's not moving in order to be out of his comfort zone and developing new skills to lead this group differently. And so he ends up having to fire them, brings new people in, repeats the experience. And having gone through this, several times with this client, and we've done it with other clients as well. I started working with a new client about a year ago, and they were going down that path of saying, well, we just need to hire in this kind of senior leader or this kind of senior leader, and it would all be fine. And my conversation with them was, but if you don't know how to lead this next level of leader, you're just going to run into the same problem, because either they're going to get into a power struggle with you, or they're going to adapt their behavior the way that everybody else has to try and please you and be okay, and nothing is going to change. And that's the struggle point, right? It's like when you're fearful, you want to stick within your comfort zone. You want to be able to bring somebody else in that's going to fix it without you having to do the development yourself. So these are just 3 of the different ways in which we see fearful leaders play out in organizations. These are leaders who don't want to move out of their comfort zone. And as a result of that, we see stagnation. And the stagnation could be within a functional area. It could be across the entire organization. Most of my stories have focused on more of that organizational, but we've seen it in individual functional areas where the functional area just does not change the way it's been doing business, much to the frustration of others around who perhaps aren't fearful and who understand and appreciate the need for change, but that fearful leaders is, digging in and holding on to their particular comfort zone. So what do you do? At the end of the day, this workshop and our videos are always about, what do we do with this? The dysfunction is there. It's normal. It's natural. It's a developmental gap. But at the end of the day, when we have a fearful leader, those leaders need to get out of the way, right? And that's the hard part, right? Because that again pushes them out of their comfort zone. We often have to deal with, or we almost always actually have to deal with, a leader's natural resistance to seeing their part, their own personal part, and how their behavior has impacted on the organization's performance and growth. Now, once we help them see through that resistance, or work through that resistance, and we help them see what it is that they actually have to do and what they can control and the things they need to influence, we give them a roadmap, because that's part of the challenge is a lot of times we'll hear their direct reports say, well, they just need to do this or they just need to do that. Well, if they knew how to do that, they'd already be doing it. So we need to give these fearful leaders a roadmap. We have to let them feel secure and to feel in control if we're going to get them to take those steps forward. We just can't say, hey, go over here and do this. We don't work like that as human beings, as we actually have to take them through, this is what you need to do first. Let's do that. Let's practice it. Let's build a new comfort zone. Let's stretch your comfort zone. And again, incrementally work with them. Now, they will cautiously and optimistically get on board when they've got that roadmap. Others, though, they can choose to hang on and dig their heels in, hang on to that belief that they're powerless, that there's nothing they can do about it, that they're too busy, that they don't have time. Again, the fear getting triggered back up in these particular leaders. They need to see, always leaders need to see how they contribute to organizational inertia. But we have to do it in a way that doesn't have them shutting it down, or again, as triggering so much fear in them that they don't want the consultant there, they don't want the help there. And then the person who's trying to help them through the fear is actually who ends up getting scapegoated in the process, right? So it is about helping them move out of their comfort zone. So if you truly want to grow your business, if you as a leader, truly want to grow your functional area, if you want to grow your impact on the organization, however you define it, you have to step out of your comfort zone. And thinking about a client of mine where they got permission to actually add resources to their team, and they're not doing it because they're so afraid that of moving into that next place, right? Their comfort zone is in doing the work and pleasing others by doing it. And now if they're just going to be leading and directing it and having to work on more complex issues within the organization, it's triggering their fear. They're staying within the comfort zone by not actually bringing that resource in. And again, they get into blaming. We hear this all the time. One of the clues, again, if that fearful leadership is at play, is that blaming. It's the employee's fault. It's the environment. There's nothing we can do about it. That those conversations around powerlessness, again, all indications that you've got a leader who's fearful and working to stay within their comfort zone. It's can be a difficult conversation, but we're trying to help leaders as we go through this become more aware of those unconscious patterns of behavior, those emotions that are driving their behavior, so they can start to open the door at least to an expanded view and an expanded perspective. They can start to look at things a little bit differently and to start to work through that fear-based pattern, right? That's really causing them to maintain the status quo, causing them to keep within their comfort zone. And when we do that, when we are fearful, when we're leading out of fear, we can't develop. It comes at the expense of our own growth too, not even just the growth of the organization, comes at the expense of our own growth and our ability to achieve our potential, okay? So if you're looking for more information for your leaders, for yourself, about how you can develop the leader through individual coaching or participating in leadership coaching programs, reach out to us. Love to hear from you, love to hear some of the challenges and some of the stories you have about your leaders and some of the dysfunctions you're seeing in the leadership patterns. And if you want more information, again, check out our videos on our YouTube channel, Dranitsaris-Hilliard. We've got our podcast series that I think we're now into episode 5 on dismantling dysfunction, where we tackle the major dysfunctions within organizations. So moving out of just the leader into organizational dysfunction, giving you some really clear strategies on what to do to help dismantle dysfunction in your organization. And again, thanks so much for joining me. Can't wait to see you here in a couple of weeks again for our next one. And again, I encourage you to go over to our website, Dranitsaris-Hilliard.com, where you can find all about our podcasts, our books, and our other resources that are available to you. Till next time.